The metallic walls of Gateway 7 hummed with the constant buzz of machinery and life support systems. Tom Mason walked through the crowded trading hall, his boots making soft clicking sounds against the polished floor. After 20 years of flying cargo ships through the most dangerous parts of space, he had learned to move with a quiet confidence that made most aliens step aside without even realizing why. Today was supposed to be simple: collect payment for delivering medical supplies to the outer rings, then head back to his ship for some well-deserved rest. But Tom could feel eyes following him. The kind of attention that usually meant trouble was brewing. Near the payment terminal, 3 bright scales lounged against the wall. Their silver-green scales gleamed under the artificial lights, and their long tails twitched with barely hidden excitement. Tom had dealt with their kind before. They were newcomers to the trading business, eager to prove themselves and too proud for their own good. "Look who's here," the tallest bright scale said, pushing away from the wall. A human, trying to play with the big boys. His universal translator made the words sound smooth, but the mockery was clear. Tom kept walking, his face calm. Most people wouldn't notice the slight tension in his shoulders, or the way his eyes tracked every movement in the room. 20 years ago, he hadn't been just a cargo pilot. The scars hidden under his simple black flight suit told stories of battles that had earned humanity its place among the stars. "I'm here for my payment," Tom said, his voice level. "Cargo lot 47B, medical supplies. Delivered on time, as agreed." The lead bright scale, who had introduced himself as Swift on their first meeting, stepped closer. His companions spread out, trying to box Tom in against the payment terminal. It was a classic intimidation move, one that might work on someone who hadn't survived 3 first-contact wars. "About that," Swift said, showing his pointed teeth in what might have been meant as a smile. "There seems to be a problem with your delivery documentation." "Several problems. Actually, enough to void the contract." Tom's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew slightly colder. In the corner of his vision, he noticed an older alien with cobalt blue skin shifting uncomfortably. The alien seemed to be trying to catch Swift's attention, making small gestures that the bright scales ignored. "The documentation is perfect," Tom said, "just like it has been for the last 15 deliveries I've made to this station. Would you like to check with station control?" Swift's tail swished faster. "Oh, we already did." Interesting thing about station control, they're very understanding when you explain things properly. Very cooperative. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, watching the scene unfold. Most of them were traders who had been working these routes for years. Tom could hear them whispering, some placing bets, others trying to warn the bright scales. He caught fragments of their conversations. "They don't know Rule 1. Should we tell them? Too late now. Poor fools." The blue-skinned alien finally stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Swift, perhaps we should." "Stay out of this, Blue," Swift snapped. "This is business between us and the human." Tom stood perfectly still, his hands loose at his sides. To most observers, he looked resigned, maybe even afraid. But the older traders were already backing away, recognizing the stance of a predator assessing its prey. "Last chance," Tom said quietly. "Honor the contract. Pay for the delivered goods. We all go home happy." Swift laughed, the sound echoing off the station's walls. His companions joined in, their scales rattling with amusement. "Or what, human? You'll complain to station security. File a protest with the trade guild. Face it, you're out of your depth here. This isn't your primitive Earth markets. This is how real business is done in space." The corner of Tom's mouth twitched slightly. Not quite a smile, but something that made the blue-skinned alien quickly retreat several steps. The old trader had seen that expression before, on other humans who had been pushed too far. "All right then," Tom said softly. "I guess we'll do this the hard way. Just remember, you chose this path." Blue had seen this coming. He'd watched it happen before, always with the same terrible results. As the crowd backed away from Tom and the bright scales, the old trader felt the familiar knot of worry in his stomach. His cobalt skin darkened with stress, turning almost navy blue. "Listen to me," Blue called out, his translator struggling to keep up with his rushed words. "There's something you need to know about humans, something important." Swift turned to him with an annoyed hiss. What could be so important about these dirt worlders? They've barely had space travel for 50 years. The gathered crowd murmured. Several veteran traders shook their heads or tentacles, recognizing the dangerous mistake in Swift's words. Some were already reaching for their communication devices, ready to record what everyone knew was coming. Blue stepped forward carefully, keeping his hands visible in the universal gesture of peace. "There's a reason we have Rule 1, he said. "I was there when they made it. 30 cycles ago, on Station Delta 9. Tom hadn't moved, but his eyes flickered to Blue with interest. The old trader recognized the look. Humans always paid attention to useful information, even in the middle of a confrontation. It was one of their most dangerous traits. A razorback merchant tried to cheat a human trader, Blue continued, his voice carrying across the now silent trading hall. "Not unlike what you're doing now. He thought the same thing. That humans were primitive, easy targets. He didn't listen to warnings either." Swift's scales rippled with irritation. "Get to the point, old one." "The human didn't just beat him," Blue said, his voice growing quieter, forcing everyone to lean in. "She destroyed him completely, not with violence, though humans are terrifyingly good at that too. No, she used our own laws against him, turned his allies against him, revealed his secrets. By the time she was done, the Razorback had lost everything. His business, his reputation, his freedom." One of Swift's companions shifted uncomfortably. "That's just one story." "It's not," interrupted a voice from the crowd. A tall, insectoid trader stepped forward, its kitten gleaming. "I saw something similar on Outpost 23. They call it malicious compliance. Following rules so perfectly it becomes a weapon." More voices joined in. "Remember the Nexus Hub incident? The Crimson Station lockdown? That business with the Mercantile Guild?" Blue nodded solemnly. "This is why Rule 1 exists. Never mess with a human. Not because they're stronger or faster, though many of them are. Not because they're smarter, though they can be brilliant. No, it's because they're different asterisk." Tom stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. His stance hadn't changed, but there was a glint in his eyes that made Swift's companions take a small step back. "Different how?" Swift demanded, though his tail had stopped its confident swishing. "They don't think like us," Blue explained. "When most species are threatened, they react in predictable ways. Fight or flight. Direct confrontation or retreat. Humans." He shuddered slightly. "Humans get creative. They find ways to fight that you never even considered possible. They turn your strengths into weaknesses. And worst of all, they remember. They learn. Every trick used against them becomes a trick they can use." The trading hall had grown so quiet that the hum of the station's life support seemed deafening. Swift looked between Blue and Tom, his confidence visibly wavering for the first time. "So this is your warning," Blue finished. "The only warning you'll get. Honor the contract. Pay what you owe. Walk away. Because if you don't..." He glanced at Tom apologetically. "Well, I tried to tell them." Tom's lips curved into a small smile. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You did try," he agreed softly. "Very thoroughly. Thank you for that." He turned his attention back to Swift. "Now, about that payment." Swift's recovery came faster than anyone expected. The bright-scale leader straightened up, his confidence returning like a shield. He pulled out a data pad and held it up for everyone to see. "Actually," Swift said, "I have something interesting to show you all." His clawed fingers danced across the screen. While the human was making his delivery, my associates conducted a routine scan of his ship. Very routine. Very legal. Tom's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Around them, the crowd watched in tense silence. Blue's cobalt skin rippled with concern. "Would you like to know what we found?" Swift's voice carried artificial sweetness. "Fascinating things about registry number TC847M. Things that station control found very interesting." On the main display screens around the trading hall, documents began to appear. Ship registration forms, maintenance records, cargo manifests, all of them belonging to Tom's ship. "Your docking permit," Swift continued, "appears to have some irregularities. Minor ones, really, but combined with these small discrepancies in your cargo manifests." He spread his arms wide, scales gleaming. "Well, station regulations are very clear about such matters." Tom stood perfectly still, watching as more documents flashed across the screens. His face showed mild interest, as if he were watching someone else's problems unfold. "According to Section 47B of Station Gateway 7's Commercial Code," Swift read aloud, clearly enjoying himself, "any vessel found in violation of multiple regulatory requirements must be impounded pending full investigation." His teeth gleamed. "Which means your ship now belongs to the station, and since our company handles asset management for impounded vessels." The crowd stirred uneasily. Several traders started edging toward the exits, recognizing the signs of an imminent disaster. Blue closed his eyes briefly, knowing what was coming. "Of course," Swift added, "we might be able to resolve this situation for a reasonable fee. Say, everything you've earned in the past 6 months." Tom walked slowly to one of the display screens, studying the documents. His movement was casual, almost lazy. But Blue noticed how every bright scale tensed when he moved, their instincts screaming warnings their pride ignored. "Interesting," Tom said finally. "Very interesting setup you have here. Must have taken weeks to arrange. Falsifying documents, bribing officials, creating a paper trail." He turned back to Swift. "Tell me, did you do this yourself, or did you copy it from someone?" Swift's tail twitched in irritation. "What does it matter? The documents are filed. The orders are signed. Your ship is already being locked down as we speak." Tom smiled. It was the kind of smile that made several nearby traders take quick steps backward. "It matters," he said softly, "because if you copied this scheme, you might not know all its weaknesses. But if you created it yourself—" He paused, looking almost impressed. "Well, that would mean you're actually smart enough to understand what's about to happen to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, no bigger than his thumb. "You see, the problem with setting up complicated traps is that they can be very fragile. One wrong move." He pressed something on the device. Every screen in the trading hall flickered briefly. "What did you do?" Swift demanded, his confidence cracking slightly. "Me?" Tom's innocence wouldn't have fooled a child. "I just sent a message to some very interesting people who might want to know about certain irregularities in Gateway 7's administrative systems, including records of exactly who accessed what files, when they did it, and how much they paid for the privilege." Swift's scales lost their shine, turning dull with sudden fear. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," Tom agreed pleasantly. "But here's something you should have learned about humans. We don't walk into dangerous space alone. We have friends, allies, and most importantly," his smile widened, "we have backups." The next few hours on Gateway 7 became a masterclass in human problem-solving. Tom sat at a public terminal in the trading hall, calmly typing while chaos erupted around him. Every few minutes, someone's communication device would buzz with urgent messages. First, the station control supervisor was called away for an emergency meeting. Then 3 customs officials suddenly took unexpected vacation days. Swift's legal representative stopped answering calls. "What are you doing?" Swift demanded, his scales now a sickly pale green. He had tried to leave twice, only to find his access codes mysteriously deactivated. "Following procedures," Tom replied without looking up. "Isn't that what you wanted? Everyone following the rules exactly." His fingers continued dancing across the keyboard. Did you know that Station Regulation 459 requires immediate investigation of any suspected document tampering? Blue watched from nearby, fascinated despite his worry. I've never seen someone weaponize bureaucracy quite like this, he muttered to another trader. A loud alarm suddenly blared through the station. Red lights flashed as security doors slammed shut, sealing off sections of the trading hall. Swift's companions tried to run, only to find themselves trapped in separate compartments. Station Security Protocol 7 Alpha, Tom announced to no one in particular. Mandatory during investigations of potential corporate espionage. Requires all relevant parties to remain in place for questioning. He finally looked up at Swift. You did read all the regulations before you started falsifying documents, right? Swift's tail thrashed in fury. You can't prove anything. Actually, Tom said, pressing another key, I don't have to. You already did all the work for me. See, when you created those fake documents about my ship, you had to access the station's secure databases. But you used your own access codes. He smiled. Amateur mistake. On every screen in the trading hall, records began to appear. Login timestamps, file modifications, money transfers, all traced back to Swift's personal accounts. But that's not even the interesting part, Tom continued, his voice carrying across the now silent hall. The interesting part is what I found when I started looking deeper, like those medical supplies you've been rejecting from other traders. The ones that somehow end up in the outer rim black markets. Swift's scales rattled with fear. How did you know about that? Simple. I delivered medical supplies, remember? And I always research my customers. Tom stood up slowly. Which is why I came prepared. Why I kept records of everything. Why I had friends watching and waiting. A new alarm sounded, this one making Swift's head snap up in real terror. It was the distinctive tone of trade guild investigators arriving at a station. They're very interested in meeting you, Tom said. Especially after I sent them copies of all your interesting business records. Did you know humans invented something called spreadsheets? Very useful for tracking illegal transactions. Blue stepped forward, shaking his head in amazement. You planned this from the start, he said. The whole time they thought they were trapping you. I was springing my own trap, Tom finished. The difference is, mine was completely legal. Just carefully selected regulations, applied at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way. He turned to Swift. You wanted to teach me about how business is done in space. Let me teach you how humans do business instead. We believe in thorough documentation, careful planning. And he paused as heavy footsteps approached. Perfect timing. The security doors opened, revealing a team of trade guild investigators. Their black uniforms seemed to absorb the light, and their expressions promised long, detailed audits in someone's future. Remember Rule 1, Tom said softly to Swift as the investigators approached. Though I suppose it's a bit late for that now. Swift watched his entire business empire crumble in less than a day. The trade guild investigators moved through his offices, downloading records and sealing doors. His partners were being questioned in separate rooms. Even his private accounts were frozen. Something in his mind snapped. You, he hissed at Tom, who stood calmly watching the proceedings. This is all your fault. His hand moved to a hidden pocket in his scaled armor. Blue saw it first. He's gotta. The warning came too late. Swift pulled out a sleek black energy pistol, its barrel glowing with deadly purple light. Several nearby traders screamed and dove for cover. The trade guild investigators reached for their own weapons, but they were too far away. You think you're so clever, Swift snarled. Let's see how your regulations protect you from this. Tom didn't dive for cover. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled. I was hoping you'd do that, he said quietly. Swift pulled the trigger. The energy bolt streaked through the air and passed straight through the space where Tom had been standing a split second before. The human moved with practiced ease, his body flowing like water around the deadly beam. "Computer," Tom called out clearly. "Emergency Protocol Human 7. Authorization Mason Combat Override." The station's lights suddenly shifted to deep red. A new alarm sounded, different from the previous ones. This wasn't the bland tone of bureaucratic procedures. This was the sharp, urgent sound of a military alert. "Protocol accepted," the station's AI announced. "Human emergency response activated. Logging threat to human life. Special regulations now in effect." Swift fired again and again, each shot missing as Tom moved with impossible speed. The Brightscale's eyes widened in growing fear as he realized what was happening. His target wasn't running away. He was getting closer with each dodge. "You see," Tom said, his voice still calm despite his rapid movement, "after the first contact wars, humans insisted on special emergency protocols being installed in every major space station, just in case someone decided to attack us." Swift's weapon clicked empty. Tom stood just out of arm's reach, not even breathing hard. "Those protocols," he continued, "give us quite a lot of latitude in terms of self-defense, because everyone agreed that letting humans get creative with revenge after an attack was much worse than letting us handle things immediately." The Trade Guild investigators hadn't lowered their weapons, but they also weren't intervening. They knew the rules about human emergency protocols. Everyone did. "So now," Tom said, taking one step forward, "you have two choices. Surrender to the Guild investigators and face charges for your financial crimes, or—" his eyes hardened, "keep escalating this situation and deal with me under emergency protocols." Swift looked around wildly. His scales were nearly white with fear now. The crowd had backed up to the walls, giving the two of them a wide circle. Blue stood with the investigators, shaking his head sadly. "You don't understand," Swift said, his voice cracking. "I can't go to prison. My species, we die in small spaces. We go mad without room to move." "I do understand," Tom replied. "That's why I was going to recommend rehabilitation instead of imprisonment. The Guild has special facilities for Brightscales, but that was before you pulled a weapon." He gestured at the pistol. "Now things are different." Swift looked down at the empty weapon in his hand, then at the human who had dodged every shot, the human who had dismantled his business with regulations and was now authorized to deal with him as a physical threat. With a shaking hand, Swift dropped the pistol. The trading hall of Gateway 7 buzzed with activity as station security processed the scene. Swift sat in restraints, his once proud scales now a dull gray. His former partners were already competing to provide evidence against him, hoping for lighter sentences. Tom stood with the Trade Guild investigators, watching security footage of the incident play on their tablets. The recording showed every shot Swift had fired and every impossible-looking dodge Tom had made. 20 years of combat experience, one investigator muttered, studying the footage, plus emergency protocols activation. This will make an interesting case study. Speaking of interesting, Tom said, pulling out his own tablet, you might want to see this. He handed it over, showing a complex web of transactions and shipping routes. While Swift was busy trying to take my ship, I had several friends backtracking his previous deals. Found something concerning. The lead investigator's eyes widened as she scrolled through the data. This goes beyond simple smuggling. These medical supplies, they were being altered before reaching the black market. Tom nodded grimly. Modified to produce some very nasty compounds. Swift wasn't just a greedy merchant. He was supplying ingredients to drug manufacturers in the outer rings. Around them, more guild agents were discovering similar evidence in Swift's offices. Each new finding made the case more serious. What had started as a simple attempt to cheat a human trader had unveiled a criminal operation spanning 3 sectors. Blue approached carefully, his cobalt skin now a more relaxed shade. You knew about this before you came to the station, didn't you? I had suspicions, Tom admitted. Several human Defense Force outposts reported unusual patterns in medical supply shipments. We needed proof, though, and a way to access Swift's records legally. He smiled slightly. So I made myself an attractive target. The lead investigator looked up sharply. You let him try to scam you. Used yourself as bait. Humans call it setting a trap with yourself as bait, Blue explained. It's apparently a common tactic for them, though usually not this elaborate. Swift, overhearing this, slumped further in his restraints. The realization that he hadn't been the hunter, that he'd been the prey all along, seemed to break something in him. What happens to him now? Asked one of the younger traders who had watched everything unfold. Tom turned to the lead investigator. As I mentioned earlier, before he escalated to violence, I'd recommend the rehabilitation program. The one designed specifically for bright scales. He paused thoughtfully. The facilities there have open spaces, gardens, much better than standard prison cells. The investigator nodded slowly. Even after he tried to kill you, you're still considering his species' needs. That's another thing about humans, Blue interjected. They can be terrifyingly efficient when defending themselves, but they're often surprisingly merciful afterward, as long as you learn your lesson. Station security began leading Swift away. The bright scale looked back at Tom one last time. I don't understand, Swift said quietly. You had all this evidence. You could have just reported us. Why go through this elaborate scheme? Tom walked over to him. Because this way, everyone got to see exactly how it happened. Every trader on this station watched you try to abuse the system, and then watched that same system take you down. They saw what happened when you tried to use violence. He gestured at the crowded trading hall. This wasn't just about stopping your operation. It was about making an example. Blue nodded in understanding. Teaching them Rule 1 the hard way. Exactly, Tom said. Because next time someone thinks about trying to scam a human trader, he looked around at the gathered crowd. They'll remember this day. They'll remember that humans don't just fight back. We plan ahead. We make preparations. We think about consequences. The message wasn't lost on anyone watching. In the days to come, the story would spread to other stations, other trade routes, and everywhere it was told, Rule 1 would gain new respect. 3 months after the Swift incident, Gateway 7's trading hall had returned to its normal bustling state. Blue sat at his usual spot near the payment terminals, sharing drinks with a group of young traders who had just received their first route assignments. But why was the human so calm about everything? Asked a newly licensed Minervan trader, her crystalline structure sparkling with curiosity. Even when Swift pulled out the weapon, Blue's cobalt skin rippled with amusement, because Tom Mason had already won before Swift ever drew that pistol. That's what makes humans so dangerous. They think in layers. The station's main screen displayed shipping notifications, including one about medical supplies being delivered to rehabilitation facilities. Swift's name appeared briefly, listed as part of a work therapy program. I don't understand, said another young trader, his feathers ruffling in confusion. How did the human know which regulations to use? There are millions of them. He didn't need to know all of them, Blue explained, gesturing at the busy trading floor. He just needed to know the right ones. Humans have this saying, work smarter, not harder. While Swift was building his illegal operation over years, Tom spent weeks planning exactly how to take it apart. A notification chime rang through the hall. Tom's ship, the TC-847M, was scheduled for arrival the next day. Several traders immediately confirmed their contracts, eager to do business with him. But surely not all humans are like that, the Minervan trader insisted. They can't all be so prepared. Blue's skin darkened thoughtfully. No, they're not all like Tom. Some are scientists who will study your weaknesses. Others are diplomats who will turn your allies against you. Some are warriors who will outfight you. He leaned forward. But they all share something important. They learn from each other. Every human knows stories about how other humans solved problems. They collect these solutions like treasures. On a nearby table, traders were watching recordings of the Swift incident. The footage had become a popular training tool, analyzed and studied across multiple stations. That's why Rule 1 exists. Blue continued. Not because humans are unbeatable. They're not. Not because they're the strongest or smartest. Often, they're not that either. The rule exists because humans are unpredictable. They study everything, adapt to anything, and never fight the same way twice. The station's docking alert sounded. Through the huge observation windows, they could see a ship approaching, sleek, modified for speed, but still clearly built for cargo. Is that? The feathered trader started to ask. Yes, Blue nodded. That's Tom's new ship. The Trade Guild gave it to him as a reward for breaking up Swift's smuggling ring. Watch how other ships move aside for him. Indeed, vessels in the docking queue were voluntarily yielding their positions. Just because of one incident, the Minervan asked. Blue laughed softly. No, young one. Because of thousands of incidents. Every time someone breaks Rule 1, humans prove why it exists. They turn defeat into victory, rules into weapons, and their enemies into examples. The young traders watched as Tom's ship smoothly docked. Station records showed he was delivering medical supplies again. Legitimate ones this time, to the same rehabilitation facility where Swift was serving his sentence. Remember this lesson, Blue said, his voice growing serious. When you're out there trading, you'll meet all kinds of species. Some will be stronger than humans. Some will be faster. Some will be older or more technologically advanced. But humans, he gestured at Tom's ship. Humans are the only ones who made the rest of the galaxy create rules specifically about not provoking them. The young traders nodded, watching as Tom began his docking procedures. In the years to come, they would share this story with others, adding to the growing legend of why Rule 1 existed. And somewhere in the rehabilitation facility, Swift would continue learning the most expensive lesson in his life. Never mess with a human. They make sure the lesson sticks.